Welcome, chosen ones. The walls always remember what the mouths forget. Chosen ones, imagine this. Every laugh behind your back, every smirk when they thought you were blind, every little move they made in the shadows, all of it now sits in plain sight on a screen. Cameras don't argue. They don't take sides and they don't blink. They simply record. And here's a fact that should shake you. Studies show people behave up to 40% differently when they know they're being watched. Now imagine the horror on their faces when they realize your house wasn't just walls and furniture. It was a witness and it caught everything. The suspense. They thought they were invisible. The reality, they were auditioning for the worst reality show ever created, starring themselves as the villains and you as the one who outlasted every plot twist. And the funniest part, the very same people who mocked you for being paranoid about protecting your space are now losing sleep over the possibility of their greatest hits being replayed in high definition. So buckle up, because what these recordings reveal about your power is more shocking, more undeniable and more unshakable than any rumor they've ever tried to spread about you. This is not just evidence. This is exposure. And exposure has no delete button. Number 1. They watch the invoice of their cruelty play back in pixels and it bankrupts their excuses. Every subtle tactic they use to twist the story now sits frozen in frames. The staged smiles, the calculated silences, the moments they deliberately ignored a cry for help. When those moments are looped and replayed, they stop being isolated incidents and start to read like a bill. Itemized, undeniable, and owed. That bill demands payment in truth. And suddenly their rehearsed defenses look like empty checks from an account with no funds. Recording strips away the grand narratives they told themselves and others. It leaves behind small exact details that add up. The laughter that cut through a room when someone needed support. The times they stepped away right before responsibility landed. The little gestures meant to humiliate or erase. Each one seemed trivial at the time, easy to dismiss when spoken about later. But stacked side by side on a timeline, those small acts create a ledger that proves intention and pattern. The bankruptcy is emotional and social. Emotionally, they can no longer claim innocence without sounding like actors reading lines from a play they've already flunked. Socially, their standing erodes because witnesses can watch the same footage and come to the same conclusion. People who once doubted begin to see the accumulation instead of just one-off moments. Allies withdraw. Reputations wobble and the infrastructure of their influence starts to crack. The video doesn't shout, it just records. Its quiet persistence makes the truth louder than any performance they prepared. Their excuses relied on fog, vague memories, conflicting accounts, plausible deniability. The camera clears the air like a ledger slapped onto theatable. There is no he said, she said. When the sequence is visible, the pattern turns subjective interpretations into objective entries that everyone can read, interpret, and verify. At the end, what does bankruptcy mean for them? It means they face consequences beyond embarrassment. Trust evaporates, authority diminishes, and the thin currency of their narratives loses value. What they once bought with charm and deception can no longer be purchased. The footage demands they settle the account, and when they can't, their defenses fold under the weight of undeniable evidence. Their silence becomes a signature of guilt rather than protection, and accountability follows. Number 2. The cameras made your ordinary habits irrefutable testimony. Everyday routines, the way you fold a towel, the exact order you put dishes away, the quiet ritual of turning a page, become more than private comfort. They become recorded proof that you are present, steady, and coherent. These small repeated acts map a life in motion. When they're replayed, they show continuity where others tried to paint chaos. Consistency is a form of evidence. It demonstrates intention, capability, and a mind that is functioning on a clear, repeatable pattern. That pattern undercuts claims that you were erratic, unstable, or unreliable. Routine behavior also exposes timing. The precise sequence of steps shows cause and effect. If accusations say you were the instigator, the footage often reveals who moved first, who slammed a door, who took a step back, who reached out. The ordinary habits captured between charged moments become anchors in the timeline. They provide context that dismantles invented narratives. No one can plausibly argue that a person who calmly tends their plants or makes a list is someone acting from sudden, inexplicable rage. Those steady habits show a mind that plans, pauses, and persists. Those tiny gestures also reveal character. A hand that always offers a cup, a tendency to straighten a picture frame, a habit of pausing to listen. These are not dramatic, but they are telling. When stacked together across hours and days, they sketch the truth of who you are. For people watching, the accumulation of mundane behavior is persuasive because it's hard to fake over time. Performance cracks when stretched across routine. Sincerity holds. That's why footage of ordinary life is so damaging to false accusations. It highlights the mismatch between private reality and public lies. Recorded habits also neutralize spin. Stories rely on selective memory and emotive retelling. A recorded daily rhythm resists selective editing because it's constant. Patterns are harder to argue with than single moments. Even skeptics find it difficult to dismiss a long series of consistent actions as coincidence. The more complete the record, the less room there is for doubt. Finally, ordinary habits humanize you in a way accusations cannot. People relate to the small banal things, making coffee, sweeping the floor, humming while cooking. When those acts are visible, viewers see a person leading an ordinary life, not a caricature crafted by someone with an agenda. That humanization changes perception, rebuilds credibility, and turns simple private routines into a powerful courtroom of witness. Number 3. Their control dissolves because the footage refuses to be negotiated. Control is most effective when things remain blurry. They depend on fog, uncertain memories, shifting versions of the same story, and the confusion that arises when no one knows exactly what happened. That fog allows them to twist details, insert half-truths, and dismiss your perspective as flawed recollection. It's how manipulation survives, by making reality seem flexible. But when the footage exists, flexibility ends. The recording captures exact moments, and those moments cannot be bargained with. A frame shows who entered first, who raised their voice, who walked away, who stayed calm. These are not opinions, they're records. Once captured, they can't be redrawn to fit someone's convenience. Their power weakens because their greatest weapon, storytelling, loses effectiveness. Spin doesn't survive when the scene is preserved in sound and sight. The control they once held by bending perception evaporates, and the ground tilts under their feet. The refusal of footage to be negotiated makes it threatening on multiple levels. It exposes them not only to you but to anyone else who watches. When lies are exposed privately, they can still cling to denial. When lies are exposed on screen, even their allies begin to doubt. What was once a tight grip on narrative becomes a slippery slope where every word is measured against visible proof. That shift breaks their ability to command loyalty or sympathy, because the evidence speaks louder than persuasion. The truth is, control was never about truth. It was about managing what people believed. Recordings destroy that economy. A moment that might once have been framed as misunderstood or taken out of context now replays in context again and again. Each replay strips away the excuses until only the bare act remains. That finesse is intolerable to someone who thrives on covering their actions in layers of explanation. What makes it even more devastating is that the camera does not care about power structures. It does not adjust to reputations or social standing. It does not soften for charm or authority. It treats every subject with the same cold equality, and in that equality, their advantage disappears. Their control depended on hierarchy. The footage levels the field when nothing is left to negotiate. All that remains is accountability. And accountability is the one thing they can never control. Number 4, the tape exposes their economy of small cruelties, the micro-abuses that build a case. Abuse isn't always a single violent act. It's an accumulation of tiny, cruel decisions that become a system over time. The footage collects those choices like receipts. The nights a prescription was forgotten. The times a smile was used to puncture confidence. The deliberate pauses when help was needed and never given. Each moment on its own looks minor and easy to explain away. Strung together in sequence, they read like a ledger of intent. The camera doesn't care about excuses. It simply records the pattern. When someone watches back-to-back incidents, the withheld medication beside the mocking glance, the small sabotage followed by an over-the-top show of concern, what appears as isolated misfortune becomes proof of design. That cumulative view changes how people interpret everything. Friends who once accepted plausible deniability begin to see coordination. Professionals called into the story, lawyers, investigators, counselors, can spot the repeated behaviors that indicate strategy, the fulcrum of control, not the dramatic moments shouted about in courtrooms or social posts, but the steady, almost bureaucratic way harm was administered. The footage turns private pinpricks into a pattern strong enough to show motive and method. The power of this evidence lies in its ordinary look. These small acts were left unchecked because they seemed unimportant. People minimize them because acknowledging every tiny harm would require constant vigilance and moral labor, but recorded together, they force a different calculation. Silence stops looking like forgiveness and begins to look like collusion. Patterns make the intangible tangible. Neglect becomes neglect. Sarcasm becomes a deliberate weapon, and avoidance becomes a tactic. The video removes the narrative that each incident was an isolated lapse and replaces it with a clear sequence that points back to responsibility. For the accused, the effect is corrosive. Their defense collapses when the strategy is visible. There's no longer room to claim they didn't mean it, or that it was all an unfortunate series of coincidences. Their network of plausible deniability fractures because the ledger the camera provides is readable by anyone who cares to look. For survivors, that visibility is liberating. What once felt like gaslighting, being told you overreacted or misremembered, becomes evidence that can be shared, examined, and acted upon. The tape doesn't demand drama, it demands honesty. And, ironically, that insistence on truth is the most devastating thing for those who built their power on recurring small cruelties. Number 5. Your posture on camera becomes a recorded moral argument they cannot answer. How you stand, how you breathe, where you place your hands, those small physical choices become statements about who you are when nothing dramatic is happening. The camera captures the steadiness of your presence in plain, repeatable footage, and that steadiness reads as proof of intention. When you hold your ground calmly instead of lashing out, the moment on film argues that you are not a spectacle, but a person with boundaries. That recorded composure undermines any narrative that painted you as unstable or reactionary, because calmness on video is difficult to fake consistently and easy for others to witness and agree on. Composure recorded over time becomes a sort of testimony. A steady posture after a provocation shows restraint and control. Viewers see the sequence of provocation, a pause, a deliberate choice to not escalate. That sequence shifts the burden of proof back to the aggressor. If they claim you were the instigator, the footage contradicts them by showing measured responses instead of chaotic reactions. When many people watch the same frames, the emotional reading becomes communal. A posture that once belonged solely to private dignity turns into public evidence of moral steadiness. This recorded steadiness has rhetorical power because it refuses the drama they depend on. Their strategy often relies on theatrics and exaggerated reaction to justify their own behavior. When the camera records you remaining composed, their theatrics look staged and opportunistic. The contrast becomes obvious. One side performs crisis, the other responds with quiet dignity. That contrast shifts perception because people instinctively side with coherence over chaos. The camera simply preserves those contrasts and makes them available to anyone who will look. Your physical composure also signals sovereignty. When you take space and hold it without apology, the footage shows an embodied claim to selfhood that contradicts humiliation. It demonstrates that your presence is not temporary or accidental, but deliberate. For those who profited from your shame, this visible claim is intolerable. Their whole system depended on wearing you down until you retreated. Footage of you standing firm cancels that strategy by proving you are not diminished. In short, posture on camera translates private resolve into public proof. It turns behavior into argument, and argument into evidence. That transformation is devastating for manipulators because it forces them to answer concrete truth instead of persuasive lie. The film does not negotiate feelings. It shows facts. Your calm recorded posture becomes a moral case that they cannot rebut. Number 6. The footage creates witnesses out of walls and lamps. The house itself testifies. A room holds more than furniture. It holds sequence and context. When a camera runs, a clock becomes a timestamp. A hallway becomes a path taken. And a kitchen tile becomes a fixed point that proves where bodies were and when. Those fixed details turn into evidence because they are constant and impartial. They don't bend to excuses or recollection. A filmed doorway records who left first. A recorded shadow marks how someone moved. The architecture of a home captured in frames supplies the timeline that words alone cannot supply. This kind of testimony is powerful because it removes reliance on memory, that slippery thing people twist to fit their story. Memories blur nights and compress sequences, Objects and space do not. A recorded cup left on the table for 5 minutes becomes proof that someone stayed. That tension lingered. A light switched off at a particular second proves an action occurred at that exact point. Those ordinary items become anchors for truth. They fix events in place in a way human disagreement cannot undo. When the house testifies, denials start to sound small and desperate. Saying someone wasn't there falls apart if the hallway camera shows their silhouette passing at 9:12. Claiming nothing happened feels empty when the footage shows a door slammed, footsteps running, and then a silence measured by a stopped clock. The physical layout where a chair faces which window was open, the orientation of a body, becomes part of the story. That context is what arguments try to avoid, because context is intentions to actions and makes motive visible. The impartial testimony of a place also reshapes who pays attention. Neighbors, friends, or investigators can watch the same frames and reach similar conclusions because the house supplies a common reference. It levels subjective readings. People stop arguing about feelings and start agreeing on a sequence of events, who moved where and when. That shared view pushes conversations out of rumor and into something verifiable. Finally, there's a legal and social force in object testimony. Courts and investigators treat context seriously. A recorded environment that lines up with claims turns suspicion into corroboration. For survivors, that means private chaos gains public clarity. For perpetrators, it means the safety net of selective memory vanishes. The house, once a background of quiet life, becomes an ally. It keeps the timeline, preserves the proof, and speaks through pixels and timestamps in a language both simple and devastatingly precise. Number 7. Seeing themselves on recording forces them to experience the ripple of their choices. Most people can live with what they've done as long as it stays abstract, tucked away in memory, where they can edit, soften, or even deny it altogether. But a recording strips away that luxury. It plays their choices back to them in real time, forcing them to confront not just what they did, but what it caused. They see the insult land on your face, the manipulation unfold in your body language, the exact moment their decision turned into your wound. The footage refuses them the comfort of distance. Suddenly cause and effect aren't spread out over months or years. They're right there back to back, undeniable. That collapse of distance is devastating. It reveals not only what they did, but the chain reaction it set in motion. A mocking comment isn't just a joke anymore. It becomes a seed that visibly shifts the atmosphere in the room. A slammed door isn't just anger released. It becomes a moment that changed the tone of an entire evening. These ripples, invisible when lived through, become obvious when replayed. Watching themselves trigger those changes forces them into a confrontation with reality they would rather avoid. The emotional impact of that confrontation varies, but none of it is easy. Some spiral into guilt as they see the weight of their choices laid bare, no longer able to cling to the myth that their actions were harmless. Others sink into panic, realizing that what they thought was hidden is now preserved permanently, able to be replayed by anyone at any time. And some react with rage, not because the recording lies, but because the truth it holds threatens the narrative they've depended on to maintain control. What makes this so powerful is that a camera doesn't moralize, it just shows. It leaves them no room to bargain with perception. They can't claim you overreacted when the footage shows the sequence clearly, their action, your response. They can't argue that it wasn't that bad when the ripple of discomfort spreads visibly to everyone in the frame. That stark honesty turns private intentions into public evidence, and there's no filter strong enough to make it disappear. In the end, what unsettles them most isn't just being caught. It's being forced to see themselves as the architect of harm. That mirror is sharper than memory, and once they've seen it, they can't unsee it. Number 8. The camera archives your unremarkable dignity. And dignity is a devastating kind of proof. Dignity doesn't come wrapped in speeches or loud defiance. It lives in the ordinary ways you carry yourself when there's no one applauding. The footage preserves these small, unglamorous details that over time create a portrait of resilience. It catches you jotting down a list to bring order to your thoughts, stepping out for air instead of exploding in chaos, watering a plant as though life is still worth nurturing. Yet together they demonstrate something that no rumor, noli, and no smear campaign can erase. You never surrendered your core. You stayed intact. This is powerful because accusations often rely on painting you as unstable, reactive, or incapable of maintaining yourself. The ordinary acts of dignity undermine that narrative completely. A person who sits down to write things out instead of unraveling, who chooses care over collapse, is not fragile but disciplined. That steadiness, replayed on camera, tells a story that gossip cannot rewrite. It offers undeniable proof that you were not broken, only temporarily confined by circumstance. The force of this evidence lies in its simplicity. Grand gestures can be dismissed as performances, but unremarkable daily actions are harder to fake. People watching the footage see continuity. Day after day you return to ordinary tasks and treat yourself with care, however small. That continuity reads as strength because it's sustainable. Strength isn't a single act of rebellion. It's the decision to live decently through a storm. The camera documents that, and it becomes a quiet but devastating rebuttal to every attempt to portray you as unworthy. What unsettles those who opposed you is how unshakable that dignity looks on screen. They wanted evidence of breakdown, something to justify their treatment of you. But the footage offers the opposite. Instead of collapse, it shows balance. Instead of despair, it shows small, persistent acts of life. They are left with nothing to point to, no frame that proves you lost yourself. And in their silence, the truth becomes louder. In the end, that archive of dignity is not just memory. It's proof. Proof that while you were challenged, you were never undone. Proof that strength doesn't always roar. It often just keeps standing quietly until the storm passes. That kind of proof is impossible to erase. And for those who built their power on your supposed weakness, it is devastating. Number 9. Recordings translate private patterns into public logic, and logic defeats fabrication. One incident alone can be twisted into anything. If someone wanted to, they could call it an accident, a misunderstanding, or even your fault. That's the power of isolation. It leaves space for imagination, and imagination is where lies thrive. But once behavior is recorded consistently, the imagination shrinks. Patterns replace guesswork. Suddenly, it's not one odd moment. It's a sequence. And a sequence tells a story that cannot be spun away, because it follows logic, motive, method, effect. That logical chain is what makes recording so dangerous for deception. A single door slam can be excused, but 10 slams across a month build a rhythm that shows temperament. A single insult could be dismissed as heat of the moment, but repeated belittling stitched across days proves intention. When footage strings those pieces together, it forms a narrative stronger than any story they try to invent. Even someone who wants to defend them will struggle, because the brain naturally follows patterns. Once a pattern is visible, it overrides bias. The strength of this logic is that it doesn't require commentary. The footage doesn't say, "Here is motive, here is method." It simply lays events side by side until the reasoning becomes obvious. You don't need a narrator to explain what happened. The viewer becomes their own narrator, and the conclusions they draw carry more weight because they feel self-discovered. That is the kind of truth that sticks. The kind people feel they arrived at on their own, rather than being persuaded into. This shift is devastating for fabrication. Lies depend on fractured context, taking a piece of reality and framing it with just the right words. But a chain of evidence leaves no room for those edits. Once the cause and effect is visible, the fabricated frame collapses under its own weakness. Judges, friends, even strangers with no connection to you will be compelled to accept the simple linear flow the footage provides. It's not persuasion anymore. It's deduction. In the end, recordings transform what used to be your word against theirs into a sequence of logic that speaks for itself. And logic, once clear, is unanswerable. No performance, no charisma, no clever retelling can out-argue a pattern laid bare. That's why they fear the footage, because it removes the theater and leaves only truth stripped of the costumes they hid behind. Number 10. The film transforms their projected identity into a mismatch, who they claim to be versus who they actually are. Reputation is often treated like a shield. People curate a public version of themselves that functions as protection. Generous in public, polite in meetings, supportive when eyes are on them. That image becomes an insurance policy, something they cash in whenever their behavior is questioned. But a recording is like an audit. It checks whether the public story matches the private reality. And when the two don't align, the shield turns into evidence of hypocrisy. For someone who thrives on double lives, this is devastating. Their power rests on the gap between how they appear and how they actually behave. They need others to believe in their kindness, so their cruelty can operate undetected. They need people to trust their word, so their manipulation can pass as leadership. The moment the footage plays back, the illusion unravels. The smile at the charity event doesn't cancel out the sneer caught on camera at home. The carefully crafted persona collapses under the weight of visible contradiction. That collapse is more damaging than being caught in a single bad act. A mistake can be forgiven. A consistent mismatch cannot. Once people see evidence that someone's public kindness was a mask for private cruelty, every past interaction is reinterpreted. Compliments sound manipulative. Offers of help look suspicious. Even silence feels like calculation. The damage to reputation isn't just exposure of one moment. It's retroactive. It rewrites how people view everything they thought they knew. The footage also strips away their usual defenses. They can't say that's not who I am. When who they are is visibly recorded side by side with who they pretend to be, they can't claim they were misunderstood when the contrast between stage charm and raw behavior is clear. The camera doesn't just show the act. It shows the break in character the moment the mask slips. That kind of exposure is impossible to argue with, because it's not about words at all. It's about alignment or lack of it. In the end, the recording becomes more than evidence of wrongdoing. It becomes a trial of character. It reveals the identity gap so clearly that even their allies have to choose between believing what they've seen with their own eyes or clinging to a story that no longer fits. And once that choice is forced, their insurance policy of reputation is void. The very image they depended on to protect them becomes the sharpest weapon against them. Number 11. Cameras catch the micro-movements of power, the small dominations that reveal character. Power rarely announces itself with grand gestures. It often moves quietly through subtle interruptions, small invasions of space, and tiny assertions that others are meant to notice without realizing it. A hand that reaches first for control, a tone that cuts off someone mid-sentence, the way a body positions itself to block or shadow another. These are the fingerprints of intent. Alone, each act may seem minor or unintentional. Together, recorded over time, they form a behavioral signature that cannot be denied or spun away. That signature is persuasive because it translates personality into action. Even someone untrained in human behavior can sense the imbalance when these patterns repeat. But for those who are trained, therapists, investigators, juries, the evidence is undeniable. The micro-movements reveal hierarchy, intent, and method. They show who seeks dominance, who manipulates the environment to maintain control, and who reacts to discomfort in ways designed to assert themselves. These are not abstract qualities anymore. They are visible, measurable, and repeatable. The camera does something else that people often underestimate. It turns ordinary surroundings into amplifiers of behavior. A doorframe, a chair, a hallway, all become reference points for how power is exercised. The way someone moves in relation to these objects, who gets the light, who gets the space, is part of the pattern. That spatial choreography is as revealing as words or facial expressions, because it is harder to fake consistently. Over time, these movements accumulate into a story of dominance, restraint, or manipulation that no narrative can overwrite. Once the pattern is visible, the stakes for the person in control shift dramatically. Small dominations that were once invisible or ignored are now on display. Their ability to manipulate perception diminishes because observers can see the signature, interpret it, and anticipate its recurrence. What was previously an unspoken hierarchy now becomes objective, observable truth. In the end, these micro-movements are proof that character exists in action, not words. Cameras preserve it, compile it, and expose it in a way that is convincing and inescapable. The subtle control they thought was hidden is now laid bare, and anyone watching can read the story that was always there, quietly unfolding until it can no longer be denied. Number 12. Your reactions captured in real time show cause rather than invented effect. Abuse and manipulation often rely on reversing roles, making the target appear aggressive while the instigator hides behind a manufactured story. They count on spectators who only see your response and assume it emerged from nowhere, detached from context. The tape is destroyed, and every reaction follows immediately after. That sequencing leaves no room for doubt. It reveals the order of events clearly, showing exactly who initiated and who responded. When your measured reaction is juxtaposed with the provocation, it creates an undeniable narrative of cause and effect. A sharp word, a dismissive gesture, a subtle intimidation. All of these are captured in sequence with your calm response. The contrast between their action and your reaction is striking because it removes ambiguity. No observer can reasonably claim your response was unprovoked or excessive. The footage allows viewers to trace the line from instigation to resolution, exposing manipulation for what it is. This real-time capture also neutralizes spin. Accusers often rely on selective memory or edited accounts to rewrite history in their favor. They hope to emphasize your reaction while downplaying or erasing the initial trigger. The camera prevents that. It preserves the timeline faithfully, showing the provocation first and your response second, leaving no gap for reinterpretation. Every gesture, tone, and expression builds a logical sequence that cannot be credibly disputed. Moreover, this visibility forces accountability. The instigator can no longer claim innocence because their actions are documented. Their strategy of projecting guilt onto you collapses when the chain of events is clear. The footage doesn't just prove your restraint. It exposes their intent. Observers can see the manipulative patterns, the calculated timing, and the repeated attempts to provoke, all followed by your controlled handling. In the end, real-time reactions captured on tape transform perception into evidence. They shift the narrative from assumption and hearsay to clarity and fact. The camera doesn't just record events. It preserves justice in motion, showing who struck first, who maintained composure, and who ultimately acted with integrity. It makes the truth impossible to deny, and the story unmistakably yours. Number 13. The recording forces the community to choose evidence over loyalty. Most people prefer stories that align with their loyalties, because believing the truth can be inconvenient, uncomfortable, or even threatening. Loyalty creates a cushion that lets others ignore inconsistencies, dismiss wrongdoing, or defend harmful behavior. When the footage exists, that cushion vanishes. The community is confronted with a clear choice. Either acknowledge what actually happened or cling to a lie. That choice is unavoidable because the evidence speaks for itself and cannot be twisted without appearing dishonest. This dynamic changes everything. When people see the recorded truth, they are forced to reassess their assumptions. Friends, neighbors, colleagues, and even casual observers can no longer rely on second-hand accounts or convenient narratives. They must reconcile what they believed with what they now see in front of them. This reevaluation disrupts old alliances built on incomplete information or biased storytelling. The act of watching the footage compels a reckoning. Those who were silent may speak. Those who supported deception may waver, and accountability begins to ripple outward. The camera in this sense becomes more than a passive witness. It becomes an instrument of moral pressure. It doesn't dictate judgment, but it clarifies the fact so thoroughly that denial or defense of lies requires conscious willpower against visible reality. Community members can no longer rely on assumptions, rumors, or emotional loyalty alone. They have to confront what happened, analyze it logically, and make a choice. That choice exposes character as clearly as the footage exposes actions. This process also reshapes social dynamics. People who once benefited from defending false narratives are forced to reconsider their stance. The credibility of those who align with truth increases, while the authority of those hiding behind deception weakens. The simple act of recording turns private behavior into public accountability. Ultimately, the recording does more than vindicate the individual it captures. It transforms the moral landscape of the entire community. It demands clarity, forces decisions, and elevates evidence over bias. The camera becomes a civic instrument, revealing patterns that loyalty alone cannot obscure, and compelling a reckoning that reshapes relationships, trust, and responsibility. Number 14. And ultimately, the tape doesn't just vindicate you. It rearranges the landscape of power itself. Evidence does more than prove innocence or correct false narratives. It alters who holds influence and who is exposed. A single recording can shift dynamics that were previously unchallenged. It can change legal outcomes by providing irrefutable proof, dismantle hidden networks that relied on secrecy and manipulation, and redirect authority to those who were previously silenced. The weight of truth doesn't just clear reputations, it redistributes power, and in doing so it destabilizes the systems built to protect the guilty. This structural shift is what terrifies manipulators most. They are accustomed to strategies that guarantee control, relying on obscurity, intimidation, or misinformation. The recording undermines all of that. It shows them that their carefully constructed systems of influence are fragile when faced with unalterable evidence. Their usual leverage, threats, fear, or deception loses value because the footage exposes a framework they cannot manipulate. They can no longer rely on others to believe the story they tell. The truth now sets the agenda. The impact extends beyond individual confrontation. Networks built on their advantage begin to crumble as allies and observers reassess loyalties. People who once reinforced their control are forced to confront reality. Silence and complicity are no longer neutral. They become choices with visible consequences. That shift in perception and alignment is permanent because the evidence remains as a fixed point everyone can reference. For the individual captured on tape, this rearrangement is liberating. It shifts the balance of power back to them, asserting authority through visibility rather than intimidation. For the manipulators, it is frightening because it proves that their past strategies no longer guarantee immunity. Every lie, every omission, and every act of control is now exposed to scrutiny that cannot be ignored or erased. In the end, the tape does more than vindicate. It reconstructs the social and moral architecture surrounding you. It doesn't just prove a point. It redefines the rules, redistributes influence, and forces a reckoning that goes far beyond the immediate moment. The landscape of power itself bends toward accountability, leaving those who relied on manipulation exposed and powerless. The recordings do more than capture moments. They reveal truth in its purest form. Every frame exposes intention, behavior, and consequence, leaving no room for lies, manipulation, or denial. They turn ordinary actions into irrefutable evidence, showing consistency where others saw chaos, dignity where others expected collapse, and restraint where others expected reaction. They dismantle fabricated narratives, reveal patterns of power, and force accountability not just on one level, but across relationships, networks, and communities. What the cameras record becomes more than proof of your endurance. It becomes a testament to your sovereignty. Your life, once constrained and scrutinized, is now visible in its full clarity. Every small act of composure, every ordinary habit, every reaction measured and intentional, adds up to a portrait of someone who refused to be diminished, no matter the forces arrayed against them. Those who sought to manipulate, humiliate, or control are left exposed, forced to confront themselves and the consequences of their choices. Ultimately, these recordings do not merely vindicate. They recalibrate power. They redistribute influence to where it belongs, force the community to choose evidence over loyalty, and make patterns of abuse undeniable. They convert the mundane into moral proof and transform the ordinary into unstoppable truth. For those who try to dominate through fear or deception, the exposure is unbearable. For you, it is liberation. Your power is preserved, your integrity is visible, and your story cannot be rewritten. The message is clear. The truth has been captured. The pattern is undeniable, and justice, both seen and felt, is inevitable. The footage doesn't just tell the story. It guarantees that the story cannot be erased. If this video opened your eyes and revealed truths that can't be ignored, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a revelation like this. Like the video to show your support, comment to share your thoughts and experiences, and share it with anyone who needs to see the power of documented truth. Every click helps spread awareness, ensures the story is witnessed, and amplifies the message that what is captured cannot be erased. Your engagement isn't just support, it's part of keeping truth alive. God bless you.